I run pretty often. I would say probably 5 or 6 days a week, some sort of running.
So a lot.
Yeah, I will sometimes I'll run like 3 miles, 5 miles, kind of depends on the day. I'll do intervals. I'll just run faster. I don't want to call it sprint, but I'll run faster and I'll walk. I go back and forth between those two. I'll run hills, just all kinds of stuff. If I feel good, I'll try to run a lot faster, you know. But I usually don't it's really rare for me just to go from 0 to 100. I don't really mess with any of that yet.
Okay. All right. So big change from what you used to do in the past.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm still lifting often, but yeah, a lot of running.
Okay. All right. So many people start just with some ground-based prep. So if we'll just go quadruped to start, and you're just going to do a heel to sky. We'll try to rotate this a little less, and we're going to come up with this bend this a little bit more. Yep.
All bent.
Yeah, and then come down and just really kind of fire that glute coming up a little bit more. Heel a little bit more up towards it. There you go.
Gotcha.
There you go. Yeah.
Yeah, my body wants to shift over that way.
Yep, you can see that.
Kind of how it works with me is my body's like all one chunk, you know, like it doesn't want to rotate without the rest of the body going.
Yeah, just do like 12 to 15 here. All right, and then we'll switch. So I like starting people with the ground-based movements, and then even we'll go through like a isometric hold series before we do some of the active dynamic warm-up. The reasoning for me at least would just be there you go. I've found that my people tend to feel better and move better when we start with more of this stability prep than when we don't. So it's just a change that I made personally after using it with some people.
I already feel my body getting warm. So.
And what I would say is that good movement requires good perception and requires safety and stability. And so when you start in these kind of positions, you can get some stability. It opens up some of the dynamic movement that you're gonna go into.
Also gives you a moment to kind of analyze where you're at for the day, right?
And then let's do, you're gonna touch your big toe and then pinky toe. Let's see how you move with this one.
Big toe out there.
Yep. There you go. Just do about 10 here.
Yeah, I can feel when I move my legs, my whole body wants to move. You know, they don't want to move independent of each other.
Well, I think in some of the videos that I've seen you running, there's such a difference, and obviously you know this, between lifting and running.
Yep.
Right? Whereas powerlifting, lifting really heavy maximal loads, it's about strain. It's about being braced. It's about maintaining stiffness.
Yep.
And then running is the complete opposite of that. Especially sprinting. Running at fast speeds is the ultimate expression of fluidity and coordination and being able to relax. So it's two completely different worlds, which it's been cool to see you kind of cross over a little bit.
Yeah, it's fun. I feel really good. Body feels great.
Well, and it's another reason why guys like James Smith and Buddy and myself will, say that the weight training is there kind of just to support the speed work.
Right.
It can't be the main course. And then let's just do some hip circles here. Let's do 10 forward, 10 backward. And then I'll have you just do the hold series after this, and then we can get up and do some more active dynamic stuff.
Yeah, when I was coaching football, I remember, the guys that were more the skills athletes, they were down to like run more, do shit outside, and then the linemen and the bigger guys all wanted just to lift, And it's like you needed to kind of separate everybody out into probably doing almost the opposite because they were just getting too much of one thing,
Well, the people tend to like to do what they're good at, right?
Right.
And then after that, let's just do a normal plank. We're just gonna hold all these for about 20 seconds. We're just gonna do a front plank first. And then we'll rotate into a side plank. Side plank, I like the top leg, out front.
Kind of like that.
Yeah. And that way, when you go ahead, you lift up, you're kind of pushing this into the ground, right?
So
we're really staying stable. Like I can't pull this off the ground.
Right. What do you think are some of the biggest mistakes you're seeing kind of being made, like when you're on Instagram and stuff like that and you watch some other coaches? Do you think some people are maybe like overcomplicating it? Do you think some of the basics, like, because this is
Pretty basic stuff.
super
right?
basic, but the basics are probably like super important, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I forget who said it, but I mean, if these complex methods really worked as well as people say, good, keeping that stable, they would become the basics, right? And so we get away from just some of this very simple stuff. And like I told you before, the only reason that I put this stuff before the active dynamic stuff was people told me they felt better. Very simple communication with the person you're working with, and then being like, I'm going to adapt and change my program based on that. Good. And then let's flip around, just do a bridge. We're going to do a bridge hold, so laying on your back.
The funny thing is, like, when you haven't done these, they're sort of challenging, And this is kind of like a GPP type of thing, right? Like where you're
For sure.
You're getting in some extra work that you'd otherwise not really getting. Like these exercises are so simple and easy, they shouldn't be all that hard.
And then we're going to do more of a long lever, so straighten your legs out a little bit more, and then we're going to lift back up and hold.
Oh, I never tried that before.
Now I load these too with barbells at some point,
Wow.
but we do that more.
That's pretty crazy on the hamstrings.
We do that more like for tendinopathy and issues, but sometimes even just like tissue prep. And okay,
That's a really good one for a hammy, huh?
Oh yeah. Well, and I use that a lot if we're rehabbing the hamstring too, right? We're just looking for different isometrics that we can train that tissue without aggravating it. So that would be like, you could do like a seated iso pushing back into something. Typically people can tolerate that. And then the bridges, and again, just extending the lever arm by going a little bit further out, and then you can do unilateral, right? There's bilateral. The other one we do one other one, and again, just if you're comfortable with it, is a adductor plank. If you want to give that a shot. If not, we can just go into, you've seen people do Copenhagen's.
This way?
Yeah, so this one stays down, and you're just going to lift up. You don't have to go as long. And like I said, if you're not comfortable with this one, there you go.
Do my own weird version of it.
Straighten this, yep. All right, that's good. Let's flip, do the other one.
Almost died doing that.
So like if you see Copenhagen's, right, this would be more like where you would start somebody, or I guess you could refer to it even as like a regression of the Copenhagen adductor. All right, that's good. We don't need to kill you. And then let's do just some of our walking prep, and then we'll do some of the mock drills. So again, just kind of basic, take 3 steps in between.
Let's see if I can get my my leg up there. It's like hard for me to grab my own leg.
All right.
I don't think I can do that.
Okay, so let's do some knee tucks. You got that one?
You spend all those years making yourself stiff, and then you're like, oh my God, I can't do this, I can't do that. Like, whoops.
And then we can do some,
That feels good.
if you can pull this up a little bit.
Try to ratchet it.
There you go. And then after a couple of those, I like people to kind of skip them a little bit. So just like nice and easy.
It's a little bit of high knees, kind of thing.
Yeah, but with it coming in.
Oh, the foot coming in.
Yeah, there you go. And then we'll just, I like to have my people walk backwards back.
Mm-hmm.
So typically we'll take this out a little bit longer.
Just some movement.
Yeah, I mean, we get very, very just forward dominant, right? And I think it was Dan Paff who, when he was at University of Florida, he was the track coach. He said that he was trying to figure out why the DBs and the cornerbacks had less hamstring strains than the wide receivers. So part of what he kind of hypothesized was that they have so much more backwards movement, developing the posterior chain even a little bit more, that he started to question, maybe I need to be putting more backwards movements into my people's programs. We do a lot. We do backwards skipping. We do backwards pogo hopping. We do some backward walking. So it's a big part of my program. I can't tell you that 100% prevents those kind of things, but I mean, again, that's multifactorial, but I don't see a lot of hamstring strains with my people, and I would say that just like a small part of the puzzle.
But you're doing a little bit of everything. Isometrics, you're doing.
Yeah, that's why I can't say, this is why.
Where do you usually start someone when someone does have an injury? Where do you usually start them to their road to start to come back?
The first thing I try to do is isometrics with them in some capacity, and if possible, 2 to 3 times a day, 2 to 3 sets of at least 30 seconds. That's where we start. And the thing about isometrics that make them so powerful is that they're the least damaging of the 3 contractions, so they can be done frequently. It's kind of similar to, like, have you done blood flow restriction training? It's very similar, except you're not using a false stimulus of like a tourniquet. This is just your own body, right? We're holding it, and then when you release, you get a lot of blood flow to the area. Also has been shown to decrease pain in a lot of people. So, right after they do it, they tend to have a little bit less pain. So it's kind of like breaking the pain cycle for that person too, while we're also starting to rebuild tissue, tendon, whatever it is that you're trying to rehab. So that's like the entry point. Once I feel like those are progressing, then we can start getting into more of like the dynamic movements or doing like some longer duration eccentrics. And I'll talk more about
eccentrics
that stuff.
seem to be really popular when someone's coming off an injury. I'm sure not all the time, but isometrics and then maybe eccentrics, and then maybe like you're getting back into like regular movements, I guess, at that point.
Yeah, so that's where I start with the isos, and then we start working in longer duration eccentrics, and then start, again, slowly just try to ramp back up to more ballistic dynamic type exercises. But like with anything, you have to start slow before you go fast, right? And those isometrics are like the safe place where you know that it's not going to bother them, and you know that you can start to get them to move a little bit better. And like I said before, good movement requires good perception. So if people expect that something's going to hurt, it hurts, right? So if we can break that pain cycle a little bit, we can get them moving in the right direction.
Yeah, James Smith, the thinker, he had me do, coming off a pec injury, he had me do strength aerobics, which I'm sure you're familiar with. and it was super brutal. I don't remember all the exact protocol to it, but it was a lot of time under tension and a lot of eccentric. I think it's from Vershansky, right?
Yep, Vershansky, yeah. So he also coined the EQIs, so eccentric quasi-isometrics, which maybe James put you through some of those, maybe not, but
You're lowering and then you pause.
yeah, so essentially, and I use these too, like I even use these not in rehab, but you would do your yielding isometric, so that would just be you holding a specific position. And then after the set time, so let's say we did 30 seconds, after that set time, you're gonna do an extremely slow eccentric. So like if we were doing a split squat, right, I held this for 30 seconds, and then I'm maximally resisting the eccentric contraction for an additional, I go from 15 to 30 seconds.
Yeah.
So it turns into like a full minute worth of work. And again, people seem to tolerate that pretty well. I would say that there's limited research on it, but what it has shown is that it's pretty good for changes in the muscle tendon unit and also building work capacity. So you're kind of like getting two birds with one stone. And I would say it's good for hypertrophy. So you can use it.
I couldn't believe how light the weights were that I was using and how challenging they were, and then how quickly it got me back. Because I was using like, 65 pounds. Like, because I tore my pec, I'm using 65 pounds. And then, over a period of time, 95, 135, 185, and so on. And then all of a sudden I start looking at what he's sending me, and I'm like, oh, we're using 365 for reps, like holy shit, like that came so almost out of nowhere. But it was excruciating. I remember doing, the reps, and it was like anywhere between like 8 to maybe like 15 reps, very slow eccentrics. And I'm not used to that training. So
yeah, I've been playing around with some 30-second eccentrics for some people. So if you thought it was brutal for your chest, if you do a 30-second iso on a split squat, you would enjoy that a lot less than what you guys were doing before. But let's do some lunges. So we just do some forward lunges after that, and then we'll do some reverse lunges on the way back. So same thing, we're gonna push back off this front heel. All right, we're gonna get some of that.
So forward and then back.
Yeah, go forward first. Just get a couple in.
Some clicks and some pops.
And I do prefer and recommend that people do these barefoot, so you're already one step ahead.
Yep.
You think about the feet are our first point of contact with the external world, right? So by having them locked up in shoes all the time, we lose the strength in the intrinsic muscles of the feet. You see people don't have as good ankle stability. And then let's just do some lateral lunges, cross over. And then I want to get into some of the fun stuff. We'll do some high knees. Well, actually, we'll do some hip swings, and then we'll do some high knees.
What are some common things, if there is any common things that you see in some great athletes, like when you see them do something right away where you're like, oh, this is gonna be a lot of fun to work with this person?
Really great athletes, I can tell, like once we start doing like your high knees and your butt kicks, it's like the ground is a springboard for them.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it's just like, it's very easy to see. Like you have the people that are more static dominant, it's like they're in fucking quicksand or they're in sand, right? They just kind of hit the ground and stop.
And that person could be a great athlete, but in a different way probably.
Yes, so they might be more of like a force dominant athlete. Again, they're more like static based. And then let's just do some, I like going backwards with these, and then we're gonna do our hip swings. And then if you're feeling real coordinated, you can skip those
kind
a little
of pop
bit.
into them.
But yeah, you'll see, like you have somebody do some high knees and some butt kicks, you tell right away their ability to get on and off the ground. And that will definitely show you what kind of an athlete they are. Now again, you could still be a force dominant athlete and still be pretty good. But what most people are looking for in most sports is speed.
Being
it's those
poppy, yeah.
elastic athletes.
Yeah, we have a bodybuilder kid that comes around every once in a while. His name's Kenny. And Kenny just even when he walks, he just kind of floats. And then he's just in here, and just because he is so strong in his own body, he'll just like make up something to jump up on. Like he'll just randomly jump up on here, which is like, who the hell would, like, not that that's that high or anything crazy, but who would even think to do that? But and he's like 240 pounds.
Yeah, that's impressive.
He's big.
Yeah, yeah.
Very bouncy.
Let's do some hip swings, and then we'll do our high knees. So we'll just do 10 forward and back like that. So you could see that this is probably a lot longer than, and we skipped a couple things on the ground, right? So the warm-ups, at least for my guys, are pretty long, just because, again, in my programming, the sprinting and the jumping is like the main stimulus. And so I need to make sure that we're prepared for that and that they feel good during those things, because that's how we're going to get the most out of it. And we'll do the other side. So we warm up pretty extensively, pretty long.
This is the program. I mean, this is a big part of it, what you do, right?
Yeah. Because if they don't move well, they're not going to play well.
Right.
And so, like, that is the emphasis in my program, is the ability for my athletes to move. That's the most important thing. That's all sports are just the ultimate contest of movement. And so I need my guys to move well. In order to move well, you have to feel good.
Well, and was it like Jerry Rice, like people would like throw up doing his warm up, you know? And so these like warm ups, they're kind of challenging, but after you have your guys do them for a while, they're not part of the workout. They're just warming
after
up.
we do like anytime I start a new athlete, a lot of times by the time we're done, they're a little gassed with the warm up. Whereas my athletes that have been doing it for a while, it's nothing to them. They don't get out of breath. They don't feel fatigued, right? So similar to what you were talking about earlier, it is a form of GPP. It is a form of building their base and their foundation a little bit.
Yeah, just if you're not sure what the hell we're talking about, watch like Christian McCaffrey or something and see like the shit that he does to like warm up. It would blow most people out.
And the last one you'll do here is we're just going to do some internal and external rotation. This will probably be fun for you.
Yeah, especially the external. There's no external. No river dancing for me.
What have you found to be the most challenging thing about trying to run more frequently?
It's just taken some time. That's all it's really been. It's just been kind of a time thing. I think the lifting actually made me really resilient, you know?
Sure.
So I think it helped a lot. And I think just genetically, I think I have some pretty good resilience. I've like, all the different sports I played, I was never hurt, never had a surgery. You know, even I fell in a squat with 1,085 and didn't have a surgery from that, you know what I mean? So it left without a scratch, but I was fucked up for a while. But yeah, I think I'm pretty resilient. So like the transition to running was more like, oh my God, my lungs and my legs just suck at this. Yeah. And so it was more just that for me.
Yeah, I think the way I describe it is earlier on, strength training is performance enhancing, right? You increase your ability to produce force and all the things that come along with that. But as you progress, it becomes more about building resilience and robustness of your tissue. And that's because the sports skill and sprinting and all the jumping, the forces and the velocities in that are so much higher than what you occur in the weight room that there's no longer a real carryover between what you do here and then what you're doing out on the field. So like I put up a video of Usain Bolt per foot 1,000 pounds into the ground, right? So you squatted over 1,000 pounds with two legs, right? Now very different. The range of motion is different, but 1 foot. Right, and in very, very short ground contact times. So the velocity is extremely high. Triple jumpers can put between 15 to 22 times their body weight into the ground with 1 foot. Like I had to look that up to really see if that was true, and there's numerous studies on that. I find that to be incredible. So again, it's less like, is me getting strong with a split squat going to help me impart 15 times body weight in the ground? Probably not. But is it going to help build like the connective tissue and the surrounding structures to make sure that I can tolerate that loading as I get more advanced?
Yeah, and who knows, maybe you need to be a little bit bigger / heavier of a person, which is counterintuitive, but to be able to handle those forces, you know, in some cases.
Yeah. So have you done many mock drills? Like,
I haven't done any hardly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So
like A-skips and that kind of stuff? Yeah, none.
Yeah. All right. So let's start. Have you ever done an A-skip?
No.
No.
This is Graham, by the way, the barefoot sprinter.
How you doing? So I like, if you've never done them before, I think we should start with the A-skip. Okay. I think I like starting with it even like earlier on in rehab, because the forces will be a little bit less than if you were doing something like a high knee, coming off the ground a little bit more. It's not a whole lot different than just skipping. Okay, so like, and you don't need to go very hard right now.
Like a rain dance.
Just go nice and easy. All right, think about staying tall. Let's see what it looks like. There you go.
I have no idea if that's
Good.
matching.
Yeah, that was all right. Let's go back. Let's do another one. You know, what's important during these drills, like I was telling you before, like real early on, you can tell, like, does somebody get, how reactive are they? You know, what's their ability to get on and off the ground? Number two, what's happening at the hips? So with sometimes weaker athletes or people who maybe aren't as coordinated in these movements, you're going to see the hips drop a lot when they encounter the ground. And then third, the thing I look for in these are just like your posture, your ability to maintain. We want you to be nice and tall, so your head stacked on top of your shoulders and your hips. And
I tend to be here a lot because that's like how I squatted.
Yeah, so
I kind
like
of squatted like this.
the old good morning.
Exactly.
Yeah, so we're using it, like some people would be like, well, these drills don't transfer to sprinting. And I would say they wouldn't provide direct transfer, so they would probably provide more like indirect transfer, but it's an introduction to higher velocity movements, right? So most things in the weight room are gonna be higher force, lower velocity, and that's where most people live. But the reason that so many people get hurt when they try to sprint is because they aren't prepared for the high velocity movements. You know, so the average person, once they graduate high school, is probably never going to sprint again, right? I mean, why would they? You know, if they take fitness classes, they do spin, even if they do things like Orange Theory, they're jogging. People go to the gym, they're just going to lift weights.
They might sprint on a bike, but they're not going to go out and sprint.
Right. So you think about it, you start to go 10, 20, 30 plus years. As Buddy always told me, if it's not trained, it's not maintained. So you think about the last time somebody sprinted was 16. You could go into the weight room all you want, but doesn't necessarily prepare you for these kind of movements. And so I had a friend who's a trainer called me like 2 years ago, and he's like, I put all these other coaches through a sprint program. He's like, and I don't know what happened, but a bunch of them got hurt. And he's like, I don't understand. They're all in shape. They're all strong. But none of them they weren't doing any higher velocity based movements, and they tried to go right into a speed program. So I would like to start people again, like, and just layer in some of the higher velocity stuff. So this is where we would start, right? Start to build up your tolerance and your capacity with drills like mock drills, and then we can try to move it into faster speeds. People tend to understand this. Let's do another round here, just so we keep your heart rate up a little bit. Head up. And nice and relaxed. Just drive that knee up and then push down. We want to land right under your center of mass. Good. And then come on back. Let's do, there's different ways to coach butt kicks. Some people really kind of come back here. I like bringing it more like heel to butt or calf to hamstring. So you can start kind of just like in place, getting feel for it. Try to bring the calf, there you go. And then what you're going to try to do is just start moving with it a little bit. There you go. Nice and relaxed. Keep going forward. Good, good. Relax.
Pretty good.
Yeah, that looked pretty good. Let's do another one there.
It's almost like the pose running. A little bit of that pose, right?
Yeah,
that
yeah.
Figure 4 movement.
There you go. Heel to butt. Just tall and relaxed. Remember, these just require good relaxation, good rhythm. And then why don't we do some, so people will do straight leg bounds. I don't start people there. I start them more with just like sub-maximal straight leg bounds.
Dion.
Yeah, so you're not going, it's not like too much to start, but just nice and easy,
right.
Kind of kicking them out a little bit. There you go. Good. How'd that feel, all right?
Good, yeah.
Let's do another one there. You know, same things, like this is our prep for your hamstrings, right? Nothing in the weight room is going to come close to the forces and the velocities that the hamstrings have to operate at during sprinting. I don't care how many RDLs and Nordic hamstrings you do, it's just not the same. Now there's other drills you can add here, so you can do like switches, and you can do double switches. Why don't you do the switches right now? Whoops. Just one at a time. Yep. Turn it into a little bit of an A-skip. All right, relax. You like the A-skips, huh?
It turned into something else. It's like if you're trying to do an accent, it turns into a totally different accent.
And then you could do high knees. So for the high knee, I like same thing, nice and relaxed in the upper body. We're tall, we're driving this knee up, and we're keeping the toes pulled up. So we're nice and dorsiflex so we can strike the ground right underneath us. So you can start in place and then start moving. There you go, keep those toes up. There you go. Good.
That'll get your heart rate up.
Oh yeah. And we're just warming up. Let's do one more of those, and then we'll do some hops. There you go. Drop the knees up a little bit. Good. Toes up. Good. Good. Relax.
I find it like interesting when you try to pick your knees up. If you watch a video, you're like, my knees aren't going anywhere.
Well, and
you feel like you're driving them, but.
And then a lot of times what you'll see is when people do them too high, and what you'll notice is if this leg comes too high, what happens to this hip? It drops, right? And so people get carried away with high knees.
What do you mean by drops? What is
so
that?
Like if I'm here, and then watch this hip if I pull too high,
yep.
right? So my pelvis rotates, and then I collapse. I'm yielding more on the ground.
Not any further advantage to get you going that way.
Right, and it decreases your stiffness on the ground, which when you're at faster speeds, at max velocity, we want stiffness during that time. So then let's do some real, what I want you to think about is keeping your whole foot on the ground. So you're just kind of yielding at your hips and your knees. And we're gonna try to keep the heels down too. Yep. We're gonna do 20 going backwards, even more of a whole foot ground contact.
Why do you want the heels to hit? Just to get that stretch?
So this is really more to disperse the force throughout the entire foot.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're gonna go forward for 20. Now you're not gonna do, these would be just like very, very even more heel, whole foot. There you go. Really, really low level, extensive plyos. And then obviously when you're doing more intensive plyometrics, you're not always gonna be landing on your whole foot, but sometimes you are.
I don't get that stretch that much because like my my calves are super tight, you know, and so I don't even have like an option. Like I'm just on my toes. Oh, that's really great. You're on your toes. It's like, no, my legs are stiff.
I can't not be
People
on
talk
it.
about a stiff ankle. I'm like,
Yeah.
this is the stiffest
You
ankle
got
you
it,
ever
yeah.
see.
Well, there's a limit. And then let's do sideways. So just nice and easy. And then we'll do some, I also have people do single leg versions of those. We don't, if you want to do those, we can, we don't have to. And then we'll do some rotational. Yep, right, left. There you go.
Take a second to figure out what the hell you're doing.
Good, good.
And then I gotta go that way, I guess.
No, you don't. You went both ways.
Oh.
You did them right. Give yourself a second, and then let's just do some forward skipping a little bit higher. And then I want you to skip backwards back. There you go. And let's do one more of
Body's
this.
like, wait, what are you doing? That feels really awkward.
Feels pretty awkward, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so how did all of that feel so
It feels
far?
really good. It feels like my ankles need that.
Yeah.
Like they really need that kind of work.
Yeah. So I would start there. You could add in other ones too, like we will do zigzag hops. We'll do them forward. We'll do them backward. We'll do single leg, side, outside, forward, backwards.
One of the big advantages of stuff like this is you can get a good amount of volume with it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So
You can do this almost every day, basically.
so the nice thing about the mock drills and even stuff like this is that, yeah, because they're more extensive in nature, you can get more ground contacts per week without it potentially interfering with the other work that you're doing. So it gives you an opportunity, work some of that posture, work some of the stiffness in the form that we want without detracting from the work that we're going to do. And for some people, it's a workout.
Right.
You know, and so especially like during rehab, this is a great opportunity for you to just slowly layer in the higher velocity movements in a safe, relatively controlled manner, because we're not at 100%, but we're not, all the way down here at 30. Most people understand things like this in terms of weightlifting more, right? So you don't take somebody that hasn't been lifting into the gym and 1 rep max them, right? But that's what a lot of people try to do with sprinting. And that's, again, they haven't sprinted in 10, 20, 30 years. What do? You bring them through an accumulation phase. You bring them through a GPP phase where you use submaximal efforts to slowly build up volume before you intensify. It's no different with sprinting. Like, we have to build that foundation first. So even if it's just pogos, 20, 40, 50, 60, slowly building up the volume. That's what you have to do with sprinting. Like, you can't go from 30% to 100% or 0 to 100. You have to, just like with lifting, you would be maybe 60 to 80% for a little bit of time, building up volume there. Then you move into the higher intense lifting.
And then even with that, when you do get your guys to be able to run fast, there's a pretty good risk if they're going 100.
So
right?
yeah,
So
and
that's like not done very frequently in training, I'd imagine.
So, the Charlie Francis made it really popular, the greater than 95% intensity. So in his school of thought, if you want to train speed, you need to be at 95+% of their maximum velocity. Some coaches are like, no, you can still get some adaptations a little bit lower than that. whatever. It's just semantics. But for the most part, you do actually have to be running very fast to get true speed adaptations. That doesn't mean though that like some lower velocity runs and lower intensity runs can't enhance it, because I do think they can. But if we're just talking just like pure maximal effort speed, you have to be at a pretty high intensity. Just like pure maximal effort strength, you got to be working at those higher percentages. That doesn't mean that sub-maximal weights don't help you with more maximal weights, because they do, but not in that direct fashion that we're talking about.
And if you were to include warm up and cool down and so on, the amount of times a sprinter per se would get into those top speeds is still probably pretty low percentage of their overall training, right?
Yeah, so I mean, they can, as their outputs rise, as their ability to express their skill gets better over time, they have to reduce the volume. And again, that's something that Charlie used to talk about pretty frequently is you build up volume over time, you build up intensity over time, but then you hit a point where the volume can't keep going up. You actually have to scale it back. And the intensity is so high that even the volume there can't be extremely high because their outputs are so high. So like we were talking about Usain Bolt or the triple jumper. How many times can you tolerate putting 1,000 pounds of force into the ground? You don't, that's when less becomes more.
It gets to a point where it's like not relative. Like people say, oh, 250 pound squat for someone that maxes 250 is the same as someone that does like 800, and they're not really related anymore at that point.
No, I mean, and again with weight training, when we talk about something like the speed reserve, people understand that better in weightlifting terms. So if somebody benches 300, okay, you get their bench to 400. 50% of their 400 is a lot higher than 50% of what their 300 used to be. So that's all the speed reserve is. If we raise your max speed, your sub-maximal efforts rise too. So that's the difference between maximum output and operational output. In the course of a game, like team sports, most people are going to be at their operational, and then they're going to have periods of maximal sprinting. But again, if we raise the ceiling, everything kind of comes along with it too. And it's the same thing in strength training. You bring up somebody's maximal strength, all the sub-maximal work comes up with it.
So because for me, I haven't really done anything like this in a really long time, except for maybe messing around doing some stuff with Graham, but I haven't like committed to doing something like this frequently. So at this point, I could probably squeeze a lot of juice out of just doing this. I would imagine. Yeah.
So where I would start somebody like you that has maybe been running but hasn't been sprinting is we would build volume here. Then we could extend them out a little bit. So you could start by doing 10 yards of your high knees, your A-skips, start by doing 2 reps there. You can build that out. Maybe you're doing 15 yards, maybe you're doing 20 yards. You can increase, and then you can increase the intensity of some, like, so we did these are called rudiment hops. They're like made popular by Altus. But then you could start increasing the intensity of those by doing even higher, more intense pogos, right? So you could squeeze a lot of juice out of just this warm up here. What I would do from there is then you could start to transition some of these drills into a relaxed sprint, right? So you could take your high knee and then take it out into a, again, not a full sprint, but not a jog, because the mechanics are going to be different sprinting versus jogging, right? But we're using these, if we're taking our high knee, right, into our sprint, we're going to be focused on that good front side mechanic action here, stepping over and down. So then you can build that out a little bit. The other thing I would do are resisted sprints. The reason that I would do that is because it's a way to regulate your intensity, right? It's going to slow the velocity of the run down. It has to, because we've added load to you.
Right.
What's so unique?
So a hill or a sled, or
hill,
mainly a sled?
Sled,
okay.
Band, prowler. Those are also great like in rehab too, because again, where most people struggle is like that reintroduction to velocity, not necessarily to force. Typically in the weight room, inverse relationship between force and velocity. Force is up, velocity is low, velocity is up, force is low. But in sprinting and jumping, force is high, velocity is high. So that's why it's so unique. That's why so few people are really prepared for it, because you have both at one time. So the resistance slows the work down. It also typically leads to good shapes and angles in somebody's acceleration pattern. So you don't have to like spend too much time coaching it, because a lot of times in acceleration, there's going to be more of a forward lean, more like horizontal. There's still vertical forces, but more horizontal in nature. The average person has a tendency to just kind of pop straight up. If you put a sled on them or a band, or you go up a hill, you maintain the angle that you're looking for. So it's just a good way to like coach those shapes without really having to coach it. And then I would also do tempo runs. Have you done any of those before?
I have, yeah.
So,
but mainly with like longer distance stuff.
Okay, so more like the endurance-based tempo runs.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with like the Charlie Francis tempo runs? Okay, so what distance have you done?
You know what? Because I just like to like be pretty free. I haven't like pinned down like real exact distances, but when I run, I'll usually just be like, all right, I'm going to run from here to there. It'll be like a couple hundred yards, or maybe 100, maybe 200 yards, somewhere in that frame.
Okay. So, yeah, I mean, there's different ways to do them, but the way that Charlie outlined it is like 75% of your max velocity over the course of a set distance, some kind of active recovery after. You can add a walk, you could skip the walk, and then you go again. So it's faster than a jog, but it's slower than a sprint. Gives you an opportunity to work on your sprint form, like at a little bit faster speeds, get a little more of an introduction to those higher velocity movements, while also breaking it up and dispersing the work capacity across your whole body, because you're going to do things like push-ups and abs, and then you're going to have a break in there. So it doesn't become too high intense, because we still want it to be aerobic. We still want it to be like recovery in nature. But again, if you're operating at 70 or 75% versus you're jogging at 50, we're now getting closer to where we want to be. If the sprinting is 95 and you're always at 50, we need to like bridge the gap a little bit here. So that's where the tempo runs work really well, because you can start to build your volume there. And even at 70, 75%, hamstrings experience a ton of work and activation at that speed. Again, more so than anything that's going to occur in the weight room. So they're one of those body parts that's very sensitive to sprinting. And there was a study I just read like 2 weeks ago that said that even after 72 hours of a pro soccer game, the hamstrings still weren't fully recovered. And that's longer than I think we would have thought before, like maybe 48 hours, but 72 hours after, they still were not fully recovered from that. So
they run like 6-7 miles, I think, depending on their position.
And they have a lot of accelerations too, and a lot of decelerations. And that's the thing that most people don't consider about most team sports. Even soccer, sure, there's a larger aerobic component, but the density involved of having to stop and start so many times is extremely taxing on your body. Deceleration can be upwards of 6 to 8 times body weight. That's a ton. Now think about how many times they do that in a game, and then they accelerate. Like it's a lot of work. So they need the aerobic system like as that engine, but they also have to be able to tolerate that constant stop and start. But so I would build your volume up in tempo runs, and I would probably start you more at like 65, 70% of your maximal intensity. But really you would have to early on just kind of go off of your effort, because we wouldn't know what your max speed is, and I wouldn't be like, hey, let's go max out on a 100-meter dash.
And then like, I guess like, what are the blind spots for people? Like I'm just imagining like if someone, and we already talked about somebody trying to like run full speed, so that's pretty obvious.
Yes.
But like, what's the next thing? Like someone trying to hold a top speed is where I've seen a lot of people get hurt. Would you kind of agree with that? Like somebody trying to, not only just like run fast, but have a pretty fast effort for like 100 meters or so.
Yeah, which again, like even when people do fly 10s or fly 20s, even some track coaches will say that even really great sprinters can't hold the posture they want for 20 meters. I remember Charlie talking about this before. They had a group of actual sprinters, and he was like, we're only going to do fly 10s, maybe fly 11s, because I don't think you guys can hold the posture I want for 20 meters. Most people would think 20 meters, that's easy. I could sprint we don't want to ingrain bad motor patterns.
Right.
Okay, so yeah, could you go out and sprint a little bit longer than that? Possibly, but are you getting in bad reps at that point? And are you losing what we're trying to target? Like, we're always trying to target a specific trait. With speed training, it's speed. But we also want good quality reps. So if the quality starts to diminish, we don't want to do it anymore. Now it's just like random effort work, and that's not what your speed training is supposed to be. It's supposed to be high quality, high intense work. So if that means less volume, but the quality stays up, great, then that's what you do. So that definitely would be an issue for some people, is the volume that they're going to try to do with their speed. Not only are they not prepared for it, but they definitely aren't prepared for the amount of volume that they're going to try to go do. So if somebody was going to do like an acceleration workout, typically for team sports, we might have them do 200 to 300 yards of volume. That doesn't sound like a lot, right? And that's for like highly prepared athletes. So somebody that isn't doing that, their outputs are lower, so technically it's not as taxing neuromuscular from a neuromuscular standpoint, but I still wouldn't start them at 200 to 300 yards. I'd probably start them at like 100, 125, 150. Total, right, which again, that could be 10-yard sprints. Seems like nothing, right? That's okay. Like, the training is a long-term game. Like, we don't need to hit 300 yards the first time you're out there.
Right.
So I would be totally fine with somebody doing 2 sets of 5 of 10-yard sprints, calling it a day. Over time, we'll extend that out, 15 yards, 20. Maybe start to do some 30s. Your acceleration work is typically going to be up to like 30, 40, maybe 50 meters, depending on the person. Then you layer in some of the faster. You could do some fly runs. You could do longer sprints, but I'm always going to start there.
Or maybe some of the meatheads watching, should they just go from like a dead stop into like trying to run pretty fast, or should they maybe like jog their way into like and then burst and run a little faster?
Well, so the nice thing about the static start is that it's going to slow you down. If you use more of like a build up like here, or a drop in, you're going to hit the ground. You're going to use that more for a fly sprint, because you're already going to be more vertical. You're going to be able to reach your top speed sooner that way. Versus if you're starting from the static position, right now we have to overcome our own body weight. We have to try to project horizontally.
It's like the resistance you were talking about with the sled or the hill.
So, and that's why strength is really important for the first couple steps. But once you get past that, it stops being about strength anymore. Because in acceleration, the ground is your friend, and you spend more time on the ground. So the ground contacts are longer, which means you have more time to produce force. So like, you probably would have good acceleration relative to like how often you do it. But then as you got into more of where it becomes about elasticity, that's where you might struggle a little bit more, because now it's the ground is your enemy. You don't want to spend a lot of time on it. You want to get on and off the ground really, really quickly. So yeah, could they like, they could kind of drop in a little bit, but then I would worry that they're going to be too high of a velocity and we're getting away from where we wanted to start. So that's why I typically would just have them either start from like a static 2-point. They could do a falling start here, go, and then you could play around. You could do push-up starts, just from this position, here, up, boom, go.
Josh Bryant like coaches a lot of that kind of stuff. I don't know if you're familiar with Josh. He's a power lifter, gas station ready.
Yeah, I've seen like some of his videos sprinting. Yeah. He does hills.
Yeah, he does hills a lot, and because he's usually talking to like an audience that the guys are pretty big, and he just like does like 8-yard sprints, and he's like, I know we're just talking about like going 8 yards and just doing a couple sets, but it's really important that you learn how to do this.
Well, he's a massive guy, right? So moving that mass even for 10 yards at a high speed is a lot of work. But yeah, the hill is great to regulate intensity. You just can't go that fast up the hill. And so that's even why I like to play with some of the starts that are more challenging, like a half kneeling start. Come in from this position, you're able to kind of overload this front leg a little bit, but you're also going to slow them down because they're not going to be able to come out of this position very fast. Here, boom, and go. So I'll use all different starts early on, again, just as a way to expose them to different movements, but also to try to slow that intensity and velocity down early on.
How long have you been studying this stuff for?
I met Buddy when I was probably 19. So
He's talking about Buddy Morris, the famous NFL strength coach, coached the Cleveland Browns for like 20 years. I don't know.
No, he wasn't in Cleveland very long, but he's been with Arizona for a while.
Oh, he's with
he was
Arizona.
with Pitt for 3 different stints, probably like at least 15 years there. And now with Arizona since I think 2013, 2014. So
I've had
maybe
Ian
about-
Danny on the show a couple times. He's out there in Arizona.
He's in Arizona, yeah. Yeah, Buddy has mentioned him before. But so probably close to 20 years. And really influenced by Charlie Francis, who James is also really influenced by. And I've read all of James' books probably like 10 plus times.
Charlie Francis, there's videos of Charlie Francis having Ben Johnson doing like squats. And not only is he doing squats, but he's doing like high squats. And then he's also got his like knees wrapped and stuff like that. And he's like giving him a spot. And I think he has him like, squatting to like a box. Like, what are some of your thoughts on that? And like, what do you think they were trying to get from that?
There's a lot of stories about Ben Johnson and how strong he was. There's reports that he could squat 600 pounds. I never saw it. Doesn't mean
and
that
benched like over 400 and weighed like 190 or something.
Yeah, so he was a freak. He also was a great accelerator. He had a great start, and part of that is because he was so strong. Charlie had a different point of view with regards to weight training than a lot of people today have. Charlie really felt like the weight room was just general exercise. I mean, that video that you're talking about, I believe in that video, they do the high box squat, they bench, and they do lat pull downs. And I think that was it. So just like very, very basic general means as to not interfere with what was most important. Whereas now you see a lot of coaches that try to get a lot more complicated and advanced in the weight room, trying to mimic some of the forces and the velocities outside in the weight room. I'm not saying who's right and who's wrong. I really like Charlie just because the way that he thinks about the training process, and so it makes me think a little bit. But the argument for higher squats or partial squats in track and field at least would be that it more closely mimics the joint angles that you see in max velocity sprinting. And then the deeper squat would be more of what you see during acceleration. So during acceleration, you might use a pin squat or a box squat where you come to a complete stop, like static overcome by dynamic, or you're going to use a trap bar, right? Because that's more aligned with what we see during acceleration. As you move on, and we're bending less here, you're going to see people use like those really heavy stomp step-ups, right? I'm sure you've seen some of those. You're going to use higher partial squats because the load can be a little bit higher. The velocity can be a little bit higher, and the joint angles are potentially more specific to what's occurring in sprinting.
Easy to recover from too, a lot of times.
Not as
the distance isn't as great.
Right, so you're not as sore,
Yeah.
right? And so it doesn't feel as taxing as taking an ass to grass squat or even the pin squat. The pin squat will kick your ass a little bit. The partial squat doesn't quite feel like that. And not everybody agrees with that, but I would say what you just mentioned is actually huge, which is that it doesn't make you sore, and it may not impede recovery as much. So if we can have a higher load and a higher velocity and a joint angle that's more specific to running, and it doesn't accumulate as much fatigue or damage to the muscle, that's probably a win. So maybe that's why it's beneficial. Maybe it's because it's like there's more transfer there. I'll let other people argue about that. But I think that it could have utility for all of those things that just mentioned.
Do you ever see like strength in the gym? Have you seen it hurt athletes?
So, people love to say strength is never a weakness. And they love to say you can never be too strong. So I wouldn't say that. What I would say is that the pursuit of additional strength could potentially detract from the skill work or the speed work. Once that happens, that's when I would say that it could start to have an impact. So it's not necessarily that they got stronger, but you get to a point where what does it take? Like, what did it take for you to go from 980 to over 1,000? Probably a lot of fucking work, right? A lot of stuff maybe you haven't done before. Once that starts to interfere with the more important stuff, I would say that's when the strength starts to become an issue. So only when it detracts from
Yeah,
the
I
main
think
goal.
J.J. Watt, he kind of said he thinks his like lust for the weight room, ended up shortening his career a bit, which is kind of an interesting statement. And so maybe he was just like too focused on it. Maybe he just loved seeing 6 plates on the squat rack or something like that, and it was to the detriment of maybe some other things.
So, and that would be, yeah. So Buddy had JJ for, I think, the last 2 or 3 years. And what he said was that he really had to convince JJ the value of sub-maximal training.
Optimal weights, right? Rather than just like...
And proper acceleration and speed work. Because again, it seems kind of counterintuitive that is going to be the main, when you're so used to lifting being the main thing you're doing. But now your acceleration and your speed work and your plyos and your med ball throws are now the main stimulus. And the weight training seems almost like secondary. That's hard for some people to come to terms with. But yeah, I think if you were to ask JJ now, he would probably say that he very likely overdid it earlier on in his career, because you have to account for that volume somewhere. I mean, we're all human. We can only tolerate so much. You look at that guy's injury history, and I'm not saying it was a result of his training, but training is stress. I mean, you're taking it to the highest possible level. So he already plays a really violent sport. He played all the time. He played with a ton of intensity. And he was working out with a ton of intensity, right? Like, there's only so much tread that we can take. And yeah, I'm sure that if he had to go back and do things differently, maybe he would have, but I think all of us would, right? That's part of just learning and making mistakes. It's the best way to learn.
What are some of the best books you think for people to start? Maybe some people are watching that want to be a strength and conditioning coach.
Definitely my favorites are Charlie Francis, The Structure of Training for Speed, James Smith, Applied Sprint Training, Zatorsky's The Science and Practice of Strength Training, I believe is what it's called. And then Verkhoshansky's Special Strength Training Manual. Those are like my 4 that I kind of recommend everybody read. But then you can't go wrong with reading like SuperTraining and reading Transfer of Training by Bondarchuk, and and then any book, honestly, by Charlie Francis, I think is really great. But those are the ones I tell everybody to read first, just so that you understand the basics and the principles.
And get around passionate people, right? Get around people that love to do this stuff and learn from them. And
people that all had skin in the game. I mean, all those people, Charlie was working on the highest level. James, was working at Pitt. He consults with a lot of NFL guys. And so they were all not just writing about it, but actually, same with Professor Verkhoshansky. I mean, there's videos of him with his guys in the lab doing depth jumps, doing all these things. So they're actually living it and writing about it. So those are the people I feel like you can learn a lot from, because it's like a blend of both. It's like not just philosophical, but also practical, what's actually occurring on the ground.
Cool. Where can people find you to get more information on you?
Just my Instagram, Fred Duncan, or my website, fredduncan.com. That's where I put most content.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. Strength is never weakness. Weakness is never strength. Catch you guys later.